Hi, my name is John Ardenfors and welcome to Bible Study. I told you once before, the Bible is not really a book. It is a collection of multiple books, 66 to be exact. And these books weren't picked by random. The Bible is not just a pile of different unrelated stories. The entire Bible is interwoven with genealogies. A biblical genealogy is basically a very long family tree that shows how every character in the Bible is related to each other. A biblical genealogy can look something like this. This is the account of Shem. 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. And after he became the father of Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And after he became the father of Shelah, Arphaxad lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. And after he became the father of Eber, Shelah lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg. And after he became the father of Peleg, Eber lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu. After he became the father of Reu, Peleg lived 403 years. Genealogies are boring. But James Ussher would disagree. James Ussher was an Irish archbishop who lived between 1581 and 1656. He wrote a book called Annales Veteris et Novi Testamenti between 1650 and 54. In this book, Ussher calculated the ages of every character in the biblical genealogies of Genesis, including the 6 days of creation, and came to the conclusion that the day of creation was at 6 p.m. 22nd October 4004 BC. Which means that the Earth, according to James Ussher's studies, is approximately 6,000 years old. While modern scientists claim the Earth to be 4.5 billion years old. Ouch. Look, I'm a strong believer in modern science, but I'm also a much stronger believer in the Bible, so how do I make sense of this? Which one is false, science or the Bible? The answer is, drumroll please, neither. The only one who is wrong is James Ussher. Again, this is how James Ussher came to his conclusion. He used the genealogies in Genesis chapter 5 and chapter 11. He added all the ages together plus the 6 days of creation. The last genealogy in Genesis ended with the birth of Abraham, and Abraham is believed to have lived in 2000 BC. With all of these numbers combined, he came to the conclusion that the earth is 6,000 years old. All of this seems pretty fine and dandy. I mean, in what way is James Ussher wrong? Well, the first mistake Ussher made was to assume that the genealogies in Genesis were finished. There are a few things that indicates that the genealogies in Genesis have gaps. The list of names in Genesis chapter 5 and chapter 11 contain exactly 10 names each, a number that appears many times in Genesis and is way too convenient to be a coincidence and not a stylistic choice. If the genealogy in Genesis chapter 11 contained no gaps, Shem, the son of Noah, outlived Abraham, but is never mentioned or hinted at again. The word son can sometimes mean descendant. That's why Jesus is sometimes referred to as son of David. 1 Chronicles 26:24 reads, "And Shebuel the son of Gershom, son of Moses, was chief officer in charge of the treasuries. Gershom was the direct son of Moses, but Shebuel was not the direct son of Gershom. Shebuel was just the descendant of Gershom. Shebuel lived approximately 500 years after Gershom. Matthew 1 and 8 reads, "And Asa begat Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat begat Joram, and Joram begat Uzziah." It is said that Joram begat Uzziah, but Joram actually begat Ahaziah. Ahaziah begat Joash, and Joash begat Uzziah. The phrase Joram begat Uzziah is simplified and basically means Uzziah is the descendant of Joram. The genealogies of the Old Testament was never used as a timetable. It was only used to keep track of family trees and not to determine exact dates. That was a lot of information at once. Let's just take a short coffee break. Okay, hold on. So those were some of the reasons why the genealogies of the Bible shouldn't be used as a timetable. They're just not reliable enough. I am sure that James Ussher was well aware of this fact, but decided to do the calculation anyway and just assumed that the genealogies were finished. And that's just fair. You have to make assumptions sometimes in order to get anywhere. Now, I ain't hating on James Ussher, okay? I'm not saying that James Ussher's experiment was worthless. Not at all. He proved that the Earth could be at least 6,000 years old, and that's pretty valuable to know. So we now know that the Earth is not 6,000 years old. With possible gaps in mind, you can stretch out the genealogies pretty far. But how far? Can it be stretched out to 4.5 billion years and match perfectly with modern science? No. With only the possible genealogy gaps in mind, you can stretch out the biblical age of the Earth to maybe 10,000 years or so. But not 4.5 billion. Not in a million years. Ha! Am I right? So now we are pretty much back at where we started. Scientists tells us that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and the genealogies of the Bible, with possible gaps in mind, can be approximately 10,000 years old. The Bible and scientific research seems pretty far away from each other at this point. So which one is wrong? Science or the Bible? The answer is, drumroll, neither. Again. How is that, you say? How can neither be wrong when the ages differ so much, you say? Well, you should know by now that I always have another trick up my sleeve. Now let's move away from those boring genealogies and instead look at the very beginning of the Bible, aka the creation narrative. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. I love the story of creation. It's such an epic and beautiful introduction. Anyway, let's make a short summary of the 6 days of creation. Day 0, God created the earth. Day 1, God created light. Day 2, God created the sky. Day 3, God created dry land and vegetations. Day 4, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. Day 5, God created sea creatures and winged animals. Day 6, God created land animals and the first human being. Day 7, God rested. The biblical genealogies could be stretched out pretty far because they probably contain gaps, but they can't be stretched out to 4.5 billion years. But the story of creation might. The Hebrew word for day is yom. The Hebrew word yom can refer to A period of light between two periods of darkness, B, a period of light together with the preceding period of darkness, C, a prolonged period of time. It is completely unknown what the word yom indicates in Genesis, so the creation could have played out in 6 days or 4.5 billion years. I don't want to come off as rude or anything, but scientists can actually say whatever they want about the age of the Earth. The Bible will always match perfectly into whatever they say, as long as it's above 6,000 years. So in conclusion, the genealogies of the Bible likely contain gaps and can therefore be stretched out to a couple of thousand years. The Hebrew word for day can mean a prolonged period of time and can therefore be stretched out to almost no end. When it comes to the age of the Earth, there really is no conflict between the Bible and science. Now you might say, well, okay, that's sweet, but when did God create the Earth then? I'm glad you asked. My favorite author, Seth Erlandson, answered that question perfectly in his book Bibeln och vetenskapen. It's written in Swedish, so I have to translate it. We can therefore summarize that the Bible does not give away any specific date of when the creation took place. The genealogies doesn't provide us with a secure basis for any chronological determinations of the creation. And the Bible itself never uses its own genealogies for chronological determinations either. If we ask ourselves the question, when did the creation take place? The scripture simply says, in the beginning. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless you. Peace!